September 27, 1963. 10:47 a.m. Senate Caucus Room, Russell Senate Office Building, Washington, D.C. Joseph Valachi, 60 years old, 5'6", wearing a cheap gray suit, sat down at a witness table facing a bank of television cameras. Senator John McClellan gavelled the hearing to order. The room fell silent. Valachi leaned into the microphone and said two words that would shatter Omerta forever: La Cosa Nostra. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. For the first time in history, a member of the American Mafia was speaking publicly about the organization's structure, rituals, and operations. Over 5 days of televised testimony, Valachi would name 317 mobsters initially. His information would eventually identify over 550 members across all 5 New York families and dozens of operations nationwide. The commission immediately placed a $100,000 contract on his head. Every major family sent assassins to federal prison to kill him. But here's what the history books don't tell you. Joseph Valachi wasn't just another stool pigeon looking to cut a deal. He was a stone killer who'd murdered at least 5 men with his own hands. He'd spent 30 years in the Genovese family, working directly for Vito Genovese himself. He'd enforced Omerta with bullets and beatings. And he didn't flip because he got caught dealing drugs or skimming money. He flipped because Vito Genovese tried to have him murdered in prison over a paranoid misunderstanding. This is the story of how one man's paranoia brought down the most secretive criminal organization in America. From a hitman for Lucky Luciano to the most protected witness in federal history. From enforcing Omerta with violence to destroying it completely on national television. Joseph Valachi didn't just survive his betrayal of the mafia. He outlived almost everyone he testified against. But here's what nobody talks about. Valachi never felt guilty about breaking the code, because in his mind, the code had already broken him first. Joseph Michael Valachi was born September 22, 1904, in East Harlem, New York. His parents, Dominic and Maria Valachi, were Italian immigrants from Naples who'd arrived in America with nothing but hope and determination. Dominic worked as a plasterer, building the tenements and office buildings that were transforming Manhattan. Maria took in laundry from wealthier families to make ends meet. They lived in a 4-room tenement apartment on East 107th Street, sharing the cramped space with 6 children. Violence was normal in East Harlem in the early 1900s. Different immigrant groups fought for territory and respect. Poverty was expected, accepted, and endured. But young Joseph Valachi learned early that there were 2 types of people in his neighborhood: those who gave respect and those who took it. And he learned that respect came from fear, and fear came from reputation. By age 15, Valachi was running with the Minutemen Gang, a crew of Italian-American teenagers who specialized in burglary and street robbery. They weren't organized crime in any sophisticated sense. They were just hungry kids who discovered that stealing was easier than working. But Valachi was different from the other Minutemen. He was small but vicious. He carried a straight razor in his back pocket and wasn't afraid to use it. While other gang members would run when confronted by victims or police, Valachi would fight. In 1921, at age 17, Valachi was arrested for burglary after breaking into a jewelry store in Manhattan. He was sentenced to 11 months at the Elmira Reformatory in upstate New York. Elmira was supposed to be a progressive institution focused on rehabilitation. For Valachi, it was graduate school in criminal technique. He met older, more experienced criminals who taught him about professional theft, organized operations, and most importantly, the value of keeping your mouth shut when arrested. When Valachi got out in 1922, he was harder, smarter, and connected to a network of criminals who'd noticed his potential. He'd also learned the most important lesson of his young life. Prison was survivable if you were tough enough, and being tough meant being willing to hurt people before they hurt you. In 1922, Valachi met Ciro Terranova, known throughout New York as the Artichoke King because he controlled the wholesale artichoke market in the city. Terranova wasn't just a produce merchant. He was a captain in what would later become the Genovese crime family, and his monopoly on artichokes was enforced through intimidation, violence, and corruption. Terranova needed muscle for his operations, guys who could collect debts, intimidate competitors, and eliminate problems. Joseph Valachi fit perfectly. Terranova gave Valachi his first real job in organized crime: enforcer. The work was simple in concept, brutal in execution. When restaurant owners refused to buy artichokes at Terranova's inflated prices, Valachi would visit them. When produce vendors tried to undercut Terranova's monopoly, Valachi would convince them to reconsider. When debtors fell behind on payments, Valachi would collect with interest. He was good at it because he understood that violence wasn't about anger. It was about results. Here's what you have to understand about Valachi's early career in the 1920s. He wasn't a mastermind or a strategist developing complex criminal schemes. He was a weapon that other men pointed at their enemies. But he was a very effective weapon. Between 1922 and 1930, Valachi participated in the Castellammarese War, the bloody conflict that would reshape the American Mafia and establish the organizational structure that lasted for decades. The war pitted Giuseppe "Joe the Boss" Masuria's faction against Salvatore Maranzano's Castellammarese clan. It was fought with guns and bombs in the streets of New York, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. Dozens of men died. Valachi fought for Masuria's side, which included Lucky Luciano, Vito Genovese, and other future crime bosses. When Masuria was murdered at a Coney Island restaurant in April 1931, Valachi switched sides immediately. Loyalty in the Castellammarese War lasted exactly as long as it was profitable and safe. The end of the Castellammarese War marked the beginning of the modern American Mafia. Lucky Luciano, who'd orchestrated Masuria's murder, established the commission system that divided New York into 5 families with clearly defined territories and hierarchies. In 1930, at age 26, Joseph Valachi was formally inducted into what was then called the Luciano family, later renamed the Genovese family after Vito Genovese assumed control. The ceremony took place in a social club in Little Italy. Valachi later described the ritual in precise detail during his Senate testimony. Lucky Luciano himself performed the initiation. Valachi's trigger finger was pricked with a pin, and a drop of blood was allowed to fall onto a piece of paper. The paper was then placed in Valachi's cupped hands and set on fire. As the paper burned, Valachi repeated the oath of omerta. "May I burn like this paper if I betray the secrets of this family." Valachi meant those words when he spoke them. For the next 33 years, he would live by that oath. He killed when ordered. He kept silent when arrested. He accepted beatings from police rather than cooperate with investigations. He went to prison multiple times without revealing family business. Omerta wasn't just a rule for Valachi. It was identity, honor, the foundation of his entire worldview. Breaking it was literally unthinkable, until Vito Genovese made it the only rational choice for survival. From 1930 to 1959, Valachi worked as a soldier in the Genovese family. His specialty was murder, not passionate crimes of revenge or anger, but professional executions carried out with planning, precision, and complete emotional detachment. Valachi later admitted to killing at least 5 men during his career, though federal investigators believe the number was higher based on his access and reputation within the organization. His first confirmed murder was in 1932. The victim was Peter Mione, a numbers runner who'd been skimming from the family's illegal gambling operations. Mione had been stealing small amounts over several months, thinking his theft would go unnoticed in the massive cash flow generated by the numbers game. He was wrong. Valachi was ordered to eliminate Mione as an example to other employees who might be tempted by similar theft. Valachi's technique was professional and methodical. He followed Mione for 3 days, learning his routines and identifying the best location for an execution. On a Tuesday evening, Mione was eating dinner alone at a small restaurant in the Bronx. Valachi walked in, approached Mione's table from behind, and shot him twice in the back of the head with a .38 caliber revolver. Mione died instantly. Valachi walked out of the restaurant, drove to Queens in a stolen car, and burned the vehicle in an abandoned lot. No witnesses came forward. No arrests were made. The murder went unsolved. That pattern would be repeated multiple times over Valachi's career. He used stolen cars that were dumped and burned after hits. He varied his methods: guns, knives, beatings, staged accidents. He never killed in anger or for personal reasons, only on orders from family leadership. He never discussed his work, not even with his wife. That discipline and reliability made him valuable to the Genovese family hierarchy. By 1950, Valachi was earning approximately $40,000 a year from various criminal activities: numbers running, loan sharking, and enforcement work. He owned a legitimate restaurant in the Bronx and a house in Queens. He was married with children and appeared to neighbors to be a successful small businessman. He was respected within the family for his reliability and feared on the street for his reputation. By any reasonable measure, Joseph Valachi was successful, except for one crucial detail that would define the rest of his life. After 20 years in the Genovese family, he was still just a soldier. You have to understand the rigid hierarchy that trapped men like Valachi. The Genovese family had roughly 250 made members in 1950. At the top was the boss, Vito Genovese, who had absolute authority over family operations and personnel. Under him were the underboss and consigliere, his top advisors and administrators. Below them were approximately 20 captains who controlled crews of 10 to 15 soldiers each. At the bottom were hundreds of associates who worked with the family but weren't formal members. Valachi was a soldier, which meant he was a made member but had no authority over other members and no crew of his own. He couldn't be promoted to captain because those positions were limited and usually filled by men with better family connections, more money, or political influence within the organization. He couldn't change families because that was considered betrayal punishable by death. He was stuck at the same level where he'd started 20 years earlier, with no realistic prospect for advancement. But Valachi was useful to Vito Genovese personally. Between 1950 and 1959, Genovese used Valachi for sensitive operations that required complete discretion and absolute reliability. Drug trafficking coordination with Corsican suppliers in France, elimination of potential witnesses before major trials, collection of debts from other crime families that couldn't be handled through normal channels. Valachi became Genovese's go-to enforcer for jobs that needed someone who would follow orders without questions and never discuss the work afterward. That relationship probably saved Valachi's life in 1957. The Appalachian meeting, where over 100 mafia leaders gathered at Joseph Barbara's estate in upstate New York, was raided by New York State Police. The raid was accidental. Police were investigating Barbara for other reasons and stumbled onto the largest gathering of organized crime leaders in American history. 58 mobsters were arrested, including Vito Genovese and most of the other family bosses. The Appalachian raid was a disaster for organized crime. It exposed the national scope of mafia operations and proved that the various families were part of a coordinated organization. More importantly, it convinced FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover that organized crime was a national problem requiring massive federal resources. Hoover had previously denied that the mafia existed, calling it a myth created by local police departments seeking federal funding. After Appalachian, he couldn't maintain that fiction. The FBI launched unprecedented surveillance operations against all 5 New York families. They wiretapped social clubs and restaurants. They photographed members and associates. They infiltrated legitimate businesses controlled by crime families. They developed informants within the organizations. For the first time, federal law enforcement was systematically targeting the mafia with modern investigative techniques. In 1959, Vito Genovese was indicted on federal narcotics charges. The government's case was built primarily on testimony from Nelson Cantelops, a Puerto Rican drug dealer who'd worked with Genovese's crew and decided to cooperate after being arrested. Genovese was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He was sent to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary in July 1959. Valachi was already there, serving time on a separate narcotics conviction. This is where everything went wrong for both men. In federal prison, Genovese and Valachi were housed in the same cell block. They saw each other daily in the dining hall, the recreation yard, and work details. They appeared to other inmates and prison staff to be close friends. Genovese was the boss. Valachi was his loyal soldier. They talked regularly and seemed to trust each other completely. But Genovese was becoming increasingly paranoid. He suspected that someone in his organization had cooperated with federal investigators to build the narcotics case against him. The investigation had been too precise, too targeted, too successful. The FBI had known exactly where to look for evidence and which associates to pressure for cooperation. In Genovese's mind, That level of inside knowledge could only come from someone very close to family operations. Genovese began watching Valachi closely. Every conversation was analyzed for hidden meanings. Every visitor was scrutinized for suspicious connections. Every letter was examined for coded messages. In Genovese's increasingly paranoid mind, Valachi was acting strangely. He seemed nervous around other family members in the prison. He was asking too many questions about ongoing operations on the outside. He was spending time with inmates who weren't connected to the organization. To Genovese, this behavior suggested guilt. He became convinced that Valachi was already cooperating with the FBI and had been the source who provided information for the narcotics investigation. He had no evidence. He had no proof. He had only suspicion and paranoia. But in the Mafia, suspicion was often enough for a death sentence. By early 1962, Genovese had decided that Valachi was a federal informant who needed to be eliminated. The plan was simple and would look like a typical prison incident. Valachi would be killed by another inmate during what appeared to be a spontaneous fight or argument. Prison authorities would investigate, find no evidence of premeditation, and classify the death as the unfortunate result of prison violence. Genovese used Joseph Di Palermo, another Genovese family member serving time in Atlanta, as an intermediary. Di Palermo was supposed to find a trustworthy inmate willing to kill Valachi in exchange for payment and protection. Di Palermo approached several candidates over a period of weeks. But word began spreading through the prison's informal communication network that Valachi was marked for death. And eventually, Valachi heard about it. On June 22, 1962, Valachi was working his assigned job in the prison laundry when he spotted Joe Beck, another inmate, watching him from across the room. Valachi had heard through prison rumors that Beck was one of the men being considered to carry out his murder. Beck was a large man with a reputation for violence, exactly the type of inmate who might agree to kill someone for money or protection. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Valachi didn't hesitate. He grabbed a 2-foot iron pipe that was part of the laundry equipment and approached Beck from behind. Before Beck could react or defend himself, Valachi struck him in the head repeatedly with the pipe. Other inmates scattered as Beck fell to the floor. Guards rushed in and pulled Valachi off his victim, but it was too late. Joe Beck died from massive skull fractures. Valachi was immediately charged with first-degree murder. Here's the crucial detail that makes this story both tragic and ironic. Joe Beck wasn't the man Vito Genovese had hired to kill Valachi. Valachi had murdered the wrong inmate. Beck was just another prisoner who'd been watching Valachi out of curiosity, possibly because he'd heard the rumors about Valachi being marked for death. Beck had no connection to the Genovese family and no intention of harming Valachi. But Valachi was absolutely convinced that Genovese had ordered his death, and killing Beck seemed to prove it. Now facing the electric chair for Beck's murder, with no hope of help from the family that had marked him for death, Valachi made the calculation that would destroy the American Mafia. If Vito Genovese wanted him dead for being an informant, Valachi decided he might as well become one. FBI agent James Flynn first approached Valachi in August 1962. Flynn had been investigating organized crime for over a decade and had heard through prison sources that Valachi might be interested in talking. Flynn was careful in his initial approach. He knew that Valachi was facing execution for Beck's murder and might be desperate enough to consider cooperation. But he also knew that approaching a made member of the Mafia was dangerous for both the agent and the potential informant. Flynn offered Valachi a straightforward deal: complete cooperation in exchange for federal protection and assistance in commuting his death sentence. Valachi didn't agree immediately. He spent weeks in his cell considering his options. He could maintain omerta, refuse to cooperate, face execution for Beck's murder, and die with his honor intact according to Mafia tradition. Or he could break the code that had defined his entire adult life, testify against the family that had raised him, and live under federal protection for whatever years remained. The decision came down to one crucial realization. Vito Genovese had already broken the code. Genovese had tried to have Valachi murdered not because Valachi had actually betrayed the family, but because Genovese suspected he might betray the family. The boss had violated the most basic principle of Mafia justice. a man could only be killed after being proven guilty of betrayal, not because he might potentially become a traitor in the future. If Genovese could break the code based on paranoid suspicion, Valachi reasoned, then the code no longer protected anyone. If loyalty meant nothing when weighed against paranoia, then omerta was just a tool used by bosses to control soldiers. If the family would kill him for crimes he hadn't committed, then he owed the family nothing. On September 15, 1962, Joseph Valachi began talking to the FBI. His first interview lasted 14 hours. He detailed the structure of the 5 New York families. He explained the hierarchy from bosses down to soldiers. He described initiation ceremonies, territorial divisions, and income sources. He named names going back 30 years. And for the first time in federal law enforcement history, he used the term La Cosa Nostra to describe the organization. You have to understand what this meant for the FBI. For over 70 years, federal agents had been investigating organized crime without understanding its basic structure. They knew individual criminals existed. They knew some criminals worked together in groups. But they didn't understand that these groups were part of a national organization with formal rules, established territories, and central coordination through a commission of family bosses. Valachi explained all of it. He drew organizational charts showing the hierarchy within each family. He described how territories were divided and how disputes were resolved. He detailed the initiation process and the rules governing member behavior. He explained how the commission functioned and who controlled it. For the first time, federal investigators had a comprehensive picture of American organized crime. Over the next year, FBI agents interviewed Valachi 37 times in sessions lasting between 4 and 8 hours each. Every statement was recorded and transcribed. Agents fact-checked his information against surveillance records, arrest reports, and financial investigations. Valachi's information proved to be accurate 94% of the time according to internal FBI analysis. When he was wrong, it was usually about specific dates or minor details. His descriptions of organizational structure, criminal operations, and personnel were consistently reliable. But the FBI wanted more than private debriefings that would help their investigations. They wanted public testimony that would expose the mafia to national scrutiny and generate political support for expanded federal law enforcement powers. In early 1963, Senator John McClellan's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations announced public hearings on organized crime. McClellan wanted a witness who could explain mafia operations to the American public in simple, understandable terms. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover recommended Joseph Valachi. The decision to televise Valachi's testimony was controversial within the federal government. Some Justice Department officials argued that public hearings would compromise ongoing investigations by revealing investigative techniques and informant information. Others worried that televised testimony would turn Valachi into a celebrity and encourage other criminals to seek similar attention by cooperating with law enforcement. But McClellan and Hoover prevailed in the internal debate. They believed the American people needed to understand the scope and structure of organized crime. They also believed that public exposure would damage the mafia's effectiveness by destroying its aura of secrecy and invincibility. September 27, 1963. The Russell Senate Office Building hearing room was packed with reporters, congressional staff, and Justice Department officials. NBC, CBS, and ABC provided live television coverage that reached an estimated 20 million Americans. Valachi sat alone at the witness table, flanked by federal marshals, facing a panel of senators and a bank of television cameras. Senator McClellan opened the hearing by explaining its purpose. The committee is particularly interested in the structure, the methods of operation, and the membership of the organization which has been brought to the attention of this committee and which is known as La Cosa Nostra. Then he called Joseph Valachi to testify. Valachi raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and began destroying the most secretive criminal organization in American history. Valachi's testimony over 5 days was methodical, detailed, and devastating. He explained that La Cosa Nostra consisted of approximately 2,000 members organized into 24 families across the United States. Each family controlled specific territories and criminal activities. The 5 New York families, Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese, were the largest and most powerful. A national commission composed of the most powerful family bosses resolved territorial disputes and authorized major operations that affected multiple families. Most damaging to the organization, Valachi named names. During his 5 days of public testimony, he identified 317 individual members of La Cosa Nostra. He gave their real names, their aliases, their positions within families, and their criminal specialties. He described specific murders in detail, explaining who ordered them, who carried them out, and why they had occurred. He identified corrupt police officers, judges, and politicians who had worked with organized crime. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Newspaper headlines across the country screamed about Murder Incorporated and the secret empire of crime. Television news programs featured analysis by criminologists and former law enforcement officials. Magazine articles explored the history and structure of organized crime. For the first time, the American public understood that the mafia wasn't just a collection of individual criminals, but a sophisticated organization with national reach and political influence. Within the mafia itself, the reaction was rage, panic, and immediate action. Commission members met in emergency session to discuss damage control and retaliation. Family bosses ordered the immediate elimination of Valachi and any family associate who might be tempted to follow his example. The contract on Valachi's life was increased from $100,000 to $500,000. Every family was instructed to contribute soldiers for assassination attempts and to provide intelligence on Valachi's location and security arrangements. But the damage was already done and would prove irreversible. FBI surveillance operations, previously hindered by lack of organizational knowledge, became devastatingly effective almost overnight. Agents now understood family structures, chains of command, and operational methods. They could target investigations precisely and develop informants systematically. Between 1963 and 1970, over 800 organized crime members were arrested based partly on information Valachi had provided. The federal government kept Valachi in protective custody at La Tuna Federal Correctional Institution in Anthony, Texas. He was housed in a specially constructed unit that was physically separated from the general prison population. Federal marshals provided 24-hour security. Valachi received death threats regularly through mail and intermediaries. Prison authorities intercepted multiple assassination plots organized by different crime families, but none of the attempts succeeded. Here's what makes Valachi's story remarkable in the context of organized crime history. He didn't just survive breaking omerta. He actually thrived under federal protection. The government paid him $15,000 for his Senate testimony and provided ongoing financial support for living expenses and legal fees. He wrote a book about his experiences that became a bestseller and generated substantial royalties. He gave interviews to journalists and academic researchers. He became the most famous former mobster in American history. Meanwhile, most of the men Valachi had named in his testimony suffered violent consequences. Of the 317 individuals he had specifically identified during his Senate hearings, approximately 200 died violently or in federal prison within 10 years of his testimony. Family leaders ordered systematic executions of anyone Valachi had compromised. The commission authorized the murder of lower-level members who might be tempted to cooperate with law enforcement. The death toll was unprecedented in the history of American organized crime. Vito Genovese, the man whose paranoia had triggered Valachi's cooperation and testimony, died in federal prison on February 14, 1969. He was serving his 15-year narcotics sentence when he suffered a heart attack at age 71. Genovese never saw freedom again after his 1959 conviction. His attempt to have Valachi murdered had ultimately destroyed his own organization and contributed to his death behind bars. On April 3, 1971, Joseph Valachi died of a heart attack at La Tuna Federal Correctional Institution. He was 66 years old. He had lived almost 8 years after his Senate testimony, longer than most organized crime bosses lived after being publicly identified and targeted. His death was peaceful, surrounded by federal agents and prison officials who had become his protectors over nearly a decade. No mafia assassin ever reached him. Here's what Valachi's survival proved about the mythology surrounding organized crime power and loyalty. The organization's control over its members was based primarily on fear, not genuine loyalty or honor. Once adequate federal protection became available, omerta became meaningless as a practical matter. Valachi had demonstrated that cooperation with law enforcement was not only possible, but could actually be profitable and safe. His example encouraged dozens of other organized crime figures to consider similar agreements when facing long prison sentences or death contracts from their own organizations. The Rat, who had been condemned by every family in America, had outlived most of them and died peacefully in his bed. The lesson wasn't lost on future generations of mobsters facing similar choices between loyalty and survival. Joseph Valachi never saw himself as a hero or a reformer crusading against organized crime. He was a career criminal who had made a practical decision when facing execution by both the state and his own organization. But his choice to testify had destroyed the most secretive criminal organization in American history. His willingness to name names had enabled law enforcement to dismantle operations that had functioned successfully for decades. His survival had proven that the mafia's ultimate threat, death for betrayal, was empty if the government provided adequate protection. That's the real legacy of Joseph Valachi. Not the man who broke omerta, but the man who survived breaking it. He outlived Vito Genovese. He outlived most of the family bosses he had testified against. He outlived the myth that loyalty to organized crime was always rewarded, while cooperation with law enforcement was always punished. In the end, the Rat outlived them all because he had been smart enough to choose the winning side in a war between tradition and survival. If you found this story revealing, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week. Drop a comment. Was Valachi a traitor who destroyed honor among criminals, or a realist who exposed the brutal truth about organized crime loyalty? Let us know. This is Mafia Talks, untold stories from the world of organized crime. Until next time.